Diabetic ketoacidosis, or DKA, is a medical emergency that typically affects type 1 diabetics. Let's discuss the pathophysiology, diagnosis, and clinical features of DKA. Let's start with some basic concepts. In the pancreas, there are cells called beta cells, and the beta cells produce an important hormone called insulin. Insulin is an anabolic hormone, and it has important metabolic effects on different organs, such as the liver, peripheral tissues such as the skeletal muscles, and the adipocytes, which are essentially the fat cells of the body. Let's talk about diabetes mellitus now, or diabetes. Diabetes refers to a group of metabolic diseases which leads to high levels of glucose in the blood. This is called hyperglycemia. The two most common types of diabetes are type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is characterized by autoimmune destruction of the beta cells of the pancreas. This means that the beta cells of the pancreas can no longer produce insulin, and this means that insulin can no longer exert its effects on the different tissues. This leads to hyperglycemia. In type 2 diabetes, the beta cells of the pancreas are still working, and they are still producing insulin. The problem in type 2 diabetes is that the tissues no longer respond to insulin, so the main problem in type 2 diabetes is insulin resistance. And again, this leads to insulin not being able to exert its effects on the different tissues, which leads to hyperglycemia. Before we go into detail of DKA, some key points to remember about diabetes. In type 1 diabetes, because the beta cells are being destroyed, there is an absolute insulin deficiency, as there's little to no insulin being produced by the beta cells. In type 2 diabetes, the beta cells are still working, so insulin is still being produced, even though it might be in very small quantities. One of the things that characterizes DKA is an absolute insulin deficiency, and for this reason, type 1 diabetics have a much higher risk of going into DKA, because they have a much higher risk of developing an absolute insulin deficiency. To understand why, we need to be clear on the functions of insulin. So here we've got the blood, and let's talk about the effects of insulin on peripheral tissues such as the skeletal muscles, the effects on the liver, and the effects on the adipocytes. Remember, insulin is produced by the beta cells of the pancreas when the blood glucose levels rise, and so one of the main functions that insulin has in the body is to lower the blood glucose levels. Insulin will stimulate the uptake of glucose from the blood into the peripheral tissues. This is the main reason why diabetic patients develop hyperglycemia, as the lack of insulin or the insulin resistance leads to increased glucose in the blood, leading to hyperglycemia. In the liver, glucose can get converted into glycogen. This process is known as glycogenesis. The reverse process, where glycogen is converted into glucose, is called glycogenolysis, and the liver can also do this process. Insulin will inhibit glycogenolysis. This should make sense, as insulin is released from the beta cells of the pancreas to lower the blood glucose levels, so insulin will inhibit glycogenolysis to prevent glucose levels from increasing. On the other hand, glycogenesis is not inhibited, so when blood glucose levels rise, the liver will convert most of the extra glucose into glycogen for storage purposes. So in the liver, insulin will stimulate glycogenesis and inhibit glycogenolysis. The liver can also do another process where it converts oxaloacetate into glucose. Oxaloacetate is an intermediate within the Krebs cycle, and the liver can convert oxaloacetate back into glucose through a series of steps known as gluconeogenesis. As gluconeogenesis is a process which increases the blood glucose levels, it should come to no surprise that insulin will inhibit gluconeogenesis in the liver, as insulin is trying to lower the blood glucose levels. Insulin is not only involved in glucose metabolism. Adipocytes are packed full of triglycerides, or TAGs, and triglycerides can get converted into free fatty acids. This process is known as lipolysis. A key point which you guys must never forget is that insulin is a powerful inhibitor of lipolysis in the adipocytes. I'll repeat that point in bold. Insulin is a powerful inhibitor of lipolysis in the adipocytes. Insulin will stimulate the uptake of free fatty acids from the blood into the adipocytes. So in the adipocytes, insulin will inhibit lipolysis, and insulin will stimulate free fatty acid uptake into the adipocytes. Let's now go into the causes of DKA. Remember, DKA is caused by two things. DKA is caused by an absolute insulin deficiency, and increased stress on the body. In terms of the absolute insulin deficiency, we talked about how type 1 diabetics have a much higher risk of going into DKA because they have a much higher risk of developing an absolute insulin deficiency. In terms of the increased stress on the body, this doesn't refer to the day-to-day stress that people can get. Increased stress on the body refers to a genuine pathological stressor inside the body, and hopefully this will make more sense as we go through the different examples of the causes of DKA. The causes of DKA in diabetic patients can be remembered by the 6 I's. The first I stands for insulin, specifically a lack of insulin in the body. This can be caused by a patient not complying with their insulin regime or due to insulin pump failure. Commonly, DKA is often the first presentation of an undiagnosed type 1 diabetic. Remember, an undiagnosed type 1 diabetic is unlikely to be taking any insulin to control their blood glucose levels, and hence are at risk of developing an absolute insulin deficiency and going into DKA. The next I stands for infection. Infection can trigger DKA by increasing the stress on the patient's body. We will discuss shortly how stress can trigger DKA, but for now remember, infection is one of the most common triggers of DKA, and usual infectious triggers include pneumonia and urinary tract infections. The next I stands for ischemia and refers to conditions such as myocardial infarctions and strokes, as both these conditions can also increase the stress on the body and trigger DKA. The next I refers to intoxication and refers to drug intoxication such as cocaine overdose. The next I stands for inflammation and refers to conditions such as pancreatitis and trauma, which can both lead to increased stress on the body and trigger DKA. The last I stands for iatrogenic causes. Iatrogenic means something that is inadvertently caused by a clinician or by a surgeon or by a medical treatment or procedure. And DKA can be triggered if a patient is on corticosteroids for an excessively long amount of time, as corticosteroids can increase the blood glucose levels, and this can increase the body's demands for insulin, which can lead to increased stress on the body. And again, this can trigger DKA. So we've learned that there are a variety of causes of DKA, and it's important to realize that all these causes can complicate the patient's presentation of DKA, and it's therefore important to investigate and manage these causes in conjunction with the DKA. Let's now go into full detail into the pathophysiology of DKA. Patients in DKA classically present with a biochemical triad of hyperglycemia, which refers to high levels of blood glucose levels, ketonemia, which refers to the presence of ketone bodies in the blood, and acidosis, which refers to a metabolic acidosis. It is very important to remember this triad because this is the triad that characterizes DKA, and we diagnose DKA based on this triad. Let's now look into how this biochemical triad develops in DKA. Remember, DKA is caused by a combination of an absolute insulin deficiency in the body and a stress state. Let's first start with the effects of the absolute insulin deficiency in the body. If there's no insulin in the body, that means that glucose uptake into peripheral tissues will be reduced, and glucose levels in the blood will rise, and patients will develop hyperglycemia. In the liver, glycogen will get broken down into glucose. This is glycogenolysis, and remember we said earlier that insulin previously inhibited this process, but because in DKA there is an absolute insulin deficiency, that means that there is no more insulin to inhibit this process, so glycogen can get converted into glucose. The liver will also convert oxaloacetate into glucose. This is gluconeogenesis, and remember we said earlier that insulin previously inhibited gluconeogenesis in the liver. But in DKA, because of the absolute insulin deficiency, there is no more insulin to inhibit gluconeogenesis. So both glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis will both exacerbate the hyperglycemia in DKA. So we're going to see how patients in DKA develop that biochemical triad, and we've just learned how patients in DKA develop hyperglycemia. In the adipocytes, triglycerides will get converted into free fatty acids. This is lipolysis, and a key point we said earlier is that insulin was a powerful inhibitor of lipolysis in the adipocytes. In DKA, because of the absolute insulin deficiency, there is no insulin to inhibit this process, so triglycerides will get converted into free fatty acids. The free fatty acids will go to the blood and get taken up by the hepatocytes of the liver. The liver will convert these free fatty acids into acetyl-CoA. This process is known as beta oxidation. Now normally acetyl-CoA combines with oxaloacetate and then goes into the Krebs cycle and then the electron transport chain to make ATP. However, oxaloacetate is being used to make glucose through gluconeogenesis. So less oxaloacetate is available to bind with the acetyl-CoA and then go into the Krebs cycle. So acetyl-CoA will not combine with oxaloacetate, so acetyl-CoA levels will start to build inside the liver as beta oxidation continues. The liver will convert this excess acetyl-CoA into ketone bodies, and the ketone bodies will get pushed into the blood. The presence of ketone bodies in the blood is called ketonemia, so we've hit the second part of the biochemical triad. Let's make some key points with regards to the ketonemia. Type 2 diabetics have a much lower risk of going into DKA compared to type 1 diabetics, because type 2 diabetics usually have a little bit of insulin in their blood, and that little bit of insulin is enough to inhibit lipolysis in the adipocytes and stop this whole ketogenic process. Type 1 diabetics, however, have an absolute insulin deficiency, and they do not have the insulin to inhibit lipolysis in the adipocytes. Hence, type 1 diabetics have a much higher risk of going into DKA because they have a much higher risk of producing ketone bodies. The problem with this ketonemia is that ketone bodies are acidic and they will produce hydrogen ions. These hydrogen ions will contribute to the metabolic acidosis that occurs in DKA. The bicarbonate ions in the blood will try to buffer these hydrogen ions into water and carbon dioxide. So we've now learnt the final part of the biochemical triad, which is acidosis, specifically a metabolic acidosis. And this acidosis can be characterized by a low pH due to the buildup of hydrogen ions in the blood, or by low bicarbonate ion levels due to bicarbonate ions being used up to buffer the hydrogen ions produced by the ketone bodies. So we've learnt about the significance of the absolute insulin deficiency in the body. Let's now talk about the effects of the stress state. When the body is in stress, for example due to infection or due to ischemia, there is a big increase in the number of circulating counter-regulatory hormones. Examples of these hormones include glucagon, adrenaline, cortisol, and to a small amount, growth hormone. Let's represent these counter-regulatory hormones with the stress emoji. In the liver, these counter-regulatory hormones can stimulate glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis, and this can further exacerbate the hyperglycemia in DKA. In the adipocytes, glucagon and adrenaline can stimulate lipolysis in the adipocytes and lead to increased free fatty acids in the blood, and this can lead to increased ketone bodies being produced by the liver. Another key point is that adrenaline can also inhibit the secretion of insulin from the beta cells of the pancreas, and this can also lead to an absolute insulin deficiency in the body. So that is the significance of the stress state in the body. Hopefully these diagrams have summarized the pathophysiology of DKA for you. Examples of ketone bodies produced include acetoacetate, beta-hydroxybutyrate, and acetate. The diagnosis of DKA is based on identifying that biochemical triad of hyperglycemia, ketonemia, and acidosis. The hyperglycemia can be diagnosed if the blood glucose level is greater than 11 millimoles per liter, or if the patient is a known type 1 diabetic. The ketonemia can be diagnosed if the blood ketones are greater than 3 millimoles per liter. The acidosis can be diagnosed if a venous blood gas or an arterial blood gas shows that the pH is less than 7.3, or if the bicarbonate ion level is less than 15 millimoles per liter. Please remember that it is also important to investigate any potential causes of the DKA, such as ischemia or infection, as well as investigate any complications from the DKA. In terms of the clinical features of DKA, DKA is very acute onset, and patients in DKA generally present within 24 hours. Patients in DKA usually have very severe polyuria and polydipsia. Polyuria refers to increased urination, and polydipsia refers to increased thirst. The reason for this is that the hyperglycemia leads to high levels of glucose getting filtered by the kidneys, and the kidneys are not able to reabsorb all this glucose back into the blood. And the problem with the glucose is that it tends to hold on to water, so a lot of glucose gets excreted out into the urine, and because glucose holds on to water, a lot of water is also excreted out into the urine. This is called an osmotic diuresis, so patients are losing a lot of water in their urine, and this leads to polyuria. Because patients are losing a lot of water in their urine, patients also develop polydipsia. The key problem that patients in DKA have is dehydration. Patients in DKA are very dehydrated because they are having very severe volume losses through polyuria, through sweating, and through vomiting. Signs of dehydration includes dry mucous membranes, cool extremities, reduced skin turgor, and if the dehydration is very severe, there could be signs of shock such as higher heart rate, low blood pressure, and reduced urine output. Patients in DKA might be nauseous and they might be vomiting. Abdominal pain is another clinical feature of DKA, although the mechanism is not completely understood. Kussmaul respiration is a classic sign of DKA and refers to the deep labored breathing that patients do to try to breathe off the carbon dioxide in the blood to try to compensate for the metabolic acidosis. Another classic sign of DKA is a fruity breath, which is due to acetone, one of the ketone bodies, getting breathed out through the lungs. Patients in DKA might have acute weight loss due to the patients breaking down fats and glycogen in the body due to the absolute insulin deficiency. Patients in DKA can also develop neurological symptoms such as delirium, altered mental status, as well as psychosis. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like on it and subscribe for more content. In the next videos, we will look at the potassium imbalances that can happen in DKA, as well as look at the management of DKA.